Hi, and welcome back. Today, we're going to have a look at modular generative music tips. In our last video about drones, we mostly looked at sound generators and complex modulation to get interesting sounds going on. So if you're interested in that, make sure to watch that video as well. We talked about things like making complex voltages from scratch, cross-modulating LFOs, and so on. This is all relevant for self-generative patches as well. But today we're focusing more on creating creative control voltages to trigger events and changes within a patch. And just like last time, this is not a complete list or anything, just a series of ideas to get you started. If you get value out of these videos, consider a like and subscribe. And have a look at my Patreon if you want to read more about my plans and support this video series. But now, let's dive right in. The biggest difference with the drone patches are the programmed changes. To get some sort of structure or more dynamic changes within our patch, we're going to create a clock and some triggers and gates. In the modular world, we can use pretty much anything for a clock. A voltage-controlled LFO is my favorite. You can have it run steady if you like, but also influence the clock speed with other sources. In example, have it slightly drift with a subtle random voltage, or send it a mixture of gates to create a pattern. I also like a steady clock that only sporadically speeds up or slows down. One way to do so is to send an offset voltage to a VCA and have that opened with a random voltage. In this case, the VCA will only open and thus allow the offset to go on and speed up the clock when the random voltage is positive. When it's negative, the clock will just stay steady. You can also use a simple attack decay envelope triggered by a clock division or random trigger to speed up the clock every now and then. If you want to slow down the clock, just invert the signal before going to the LFO. Clock dividers are a great tool to transform a single clock signal into a multitude of related signals that you can send through your patch. They go from very simple to more complex. Clock dividers output divisions of the incoming clock. So let's say this is the square wave LFO you use as a clock. Simple divisions like divide by 2, 4 or 8 would look like this. You can use these to create events that are rhythmically related to the master clock. A basic example is the Doopfer A161, which offers basic divide by 2, 4, 8, 16 and so on. The Doopfer A162 offers more divisions, like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and prime numbers. Something like the 4-mesh quad clock distributor creates only 4 divisions at once, but each divider can divide up to 32 as well as multiply up to 16 times. Even more so, you have voltage control over the divisions, which gives you more creativity. Final example is the make noise tempi that can be used to tap in your own divisions on the fly, and is a great tool for live performances as well. Pay attention though that there is a difference between triggers and gates. Many dividers only output one of them, regardless of what you feed them. Triggers are short high voltage peaks, and gates are longer continuous high voltages. Gates can be used to trigger something, but triggers cannot be used to gate something. I use the Doopfer A162 because it offers different division modes, but also offers a choice between triggers and gates. When it comes down to clock divisions, more is more. If you have 2 clock dividers, you can set them to different intervals and combine them, or even run them at completely independent clock speeds to create shifting patterns. You can also just use slow square wave LFOs as unsynced gate signals. And you can throw in clocked sample and hold to create random gates, as you never know if the signal will be positive and strong enough to gate something. If complex patterns interest you, then for sure have a look at logic modules like the Doopfer A166 or IntelliGel plug. Logic modules are analog comparators. You can feed them 2 or more signals, and based on the mode or setting, it will output a new pattern based on those. I might make a quick video explaining logic in detail soon. Another thing to look at are sequencers. This is too big of a topic for now and there are many choices, but something like the Make Noise Relay or Doopfer A155 will give you a huge amount of ways to play with melodies and triggers. And definitely don't forget outboard sequencers you like or already have. I have a BeatStep Pro and Korg SQ1, and both can be clocked by a modular signal and provide gates, triggers, and have some nice random features to inject into your patches. So now that we have a nice structure of clocks, triggers, and gates going on, what do we do with these? Triggers are great for starting simple attack decay generators, to fire off a short peak or a slowly rising signal, for example. They also work well to re-trigger LFOs, to create tempo sync modulation patterns. Triggers can also be used to feed back into your patch, to clocks, reset clock dividers or sequencers, for example. And, of course, you can use triggers to trigger drum and percussive modules. Gates are great to create an effect that lasts for a longer time. You can gate a full ADSR to change something over time, or gate an event by opening a VCA and allowing a signal to pass through it. Gates can also do pretty much anything a trigger can do. The possibilities are pretty much endless in modular, but let's have a look at a few examples. You can use a trigger to fire off an attack decay envelope and send it to open a VCA, allowing a certain sound to come through. For example, you can use a slow clock division to allow a fast melodic voice to fade in every now and then. You can use a triggered envelope to speed up or slow down the clock speed, send it to effect modules to have a delay or reverb swell in and out, change the wave shape, or open up a filter in a patch. Pretty much anything really. Using triggers to reset LFOs can create more interesting LFO shapes, like this. You can use those to open a VCA, allowing a more percussive noise sound to come through, or create interesting rhythmic modulation in a synth voice. Gates can be used for longer effects. Send a gate to an ADSR or even two ADSRs mixed back together if you like more creative shapes, and send that to a parameter in a synth voice like a filter or wave folder to change the character of a sound for a sustained period. You can use the gate itself to open a VCA and let something through. That can be another sound again, but also a control voltage. For example, allow a sequencer to pass on to an oscillator, turning a steady drone into a melodic part. Or open a VCA to allow a trigger pattern to go through to a percussive module, effectively starting a drum sequence. You can use the same trick to allow a clock signal to start and stop a sequencer, like the Korg SQ1. If a hard gate has, well, two hard edges, you can use a sustained envelope or slew limiter to create gates with slowly rising and falling edges. There are many more examples, but the idea here is simple. Triggers and gates are just modular voltages that you can use on a lot of different things. By layering or combining events, you can create really interesting patches. We'll come back to this later. First, let's have a look at melodies. Patching up your modular to generate melodies is a lot of fun and often an interesting part of generative music. Quite some modules can output quantized voltages, so you can sequence oscillators directly. Modules like the mutable instruments marbles or make noise René are very interesting for random to semi-random melodies. But let's have a look at making melodies with a quantizer. And just in case, a quantizer is a module that takes any incoming control voltage, like a slow sine wave LFO, and outputs a stepped voltage that matches the 1 volt per octave scale. You can feed them any signal you like, and out comes a related melody in a scale of your choice. There are a lot of different quantizers with different possibilities though, so if you're looking for any, be sure to read up on the module carefully. I used the dupe for A156. It's limited in its options, but does offer two independent quantizers in one. Noise or a random voltage to a quantizer triggered by a clock is a classic configuration that will give you totally random notes. It can be nice for things like a bass line if you keep the range very limited. If you want more control over the random voltage, or your quantizer only responds to positive voltages, you can use an offset generator and mixer. With the offset, you can set the node around which the random voltage moves, and by mixing in the random voltage, you can determine the spread of random nodes that occur. Check my video on basic utilities if you'd like to know more about this. Instead of using random voltages, you can mix LFOs and envelopes to a quantizer to create simple, repetitive melodies. For example, take a synced LFO, ADSR, and a random voltage to a mixer, and then a quantizer. With some manual tweaking of the mixer, you can morph between different repeating melodies or add some random to it. If you use different clock divisions to trigger or gate the signals you use, you create loops with different lengths, which can be fun. Instead of a mixer, you can also use a mixing VCA and use other voltages to automate or randomize the mix. With the right kind of balance, you can create fairly random melodies while still having certain themes that come back every now and then. You can add a gate from a clock divider to the mix before the quantizer to bring the whole melody up or down for a few bars. Or send the gate directly to the octave input on a quantizer for bigger effects. You can increase the variations by running the gate through its own VCA and modulate it with a very slow, rising envelope, for example, to have the melody rise over time. Of course, you can also just use a sequencer as your main source, but mix the output with other voltages to create variations. Mix them with a subtle LFO or a smooth random voltage, for example. By controlling the amount of extra signal, you can go from maintaining your original sequence, but just have a single note be a bit higher or lower every now and then, to complete random. You can have any modulation happen every now and then by sending it through a VCA first and have that opened with a triggered attack decay envelope or gate every now and then. In any case, if you modulate the output of a quantized sequencer in any way, you will have to run it through a quantizer after modulation. Once you have a 1 volt per octave signal going on, you can create variations of that signal by running it through a sample and hold and trigger it with a slower speed. Combining LFOs, envelopes and sequences into new signals and using gates and VCAs to automate certain changes gives you the possibility to program entire song structures. At the end though, it all comes down to making it sound nice. Just as a good drone comes down to sound design, a generative patch also depends on your composition and musical skills. It might help to think of your self-generating patch as a track with different elements that have to work together. Try to visualize a structure. Maybe you have 1 or 2 consistent elements that carry the track, and then arrange shifting and random fitting sounds around that to keep it interesting. Maybe you have a single voice that changes between 2 different melodies, each linked to other sounds that happen at the same time. Maybe you have a quiet sort of intro sound and a main sound with drums and parts that overlap in slightly shifting ways. If I now use the same visualization on different outputs of a clock divider and envelopes they trigger or gate, and you link those to melodies, sounds that fade in and out, or drum sequences that start and stop, you can easily imagine a complex patch becoming an entire track. There are many options, of course, and I'm not going to tell you what music to make here, but thinking about what structure or result you want to achieve can make it a lot easier to decide how or with what modules you like to work. If you enjoyed this, subscribe for more content. If you have more tips, let us know in the comments. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching and see you next time.